All right, man. What's going on?
Not much, just hanging in there, man. Just trying to knock out everything on the old to-do list, Pat. Some days are a little more
Good luck.
successful than others. So
Yeah, good luck with that.
yeah.
I tell you what, I was this is how easy I'm derailed. Like
Mm,
tower discipline, nutrition, just so happy. I'm in a good groove going on. Nutrition's like the thing I always have to like I don't miss workouts, but the
yeah.
nutrition, there's a strike zone there.
Okay.
you know? And when I'm doing good, I'm feeling good, and I've been doing good, and I'm like, I'm in a good groove. Nothing can derail me. And then my wife walks through the door last night. She goes, I bought a big thing of cornbread. I'm like, well, there we go. It's
That's all it takes.
that's all it took. It was just
Yeah,
that
well,
simple because
out the window.
there's gonna I'm not gonna have one reasonably sized piece. That's not going to
Yeah.
occur. There's gonna be another and another. And when I'll only stop eating when my stomach gives me a delayed signal of, sir, you've overdone it. And that's what happened. And it was so delicious. No regrets. It was so delicious. So I'm sure I'll PR today. I get some back squats to doing, and cornbread is like the perfect fuel for back squats, I
So
think.
there you go, everybody out there. This is tip number one from Pat Sherwood's Big Book of Nutrition. Don't bring it into the home if you don't.
Oh
If
man.
you're not prepared to like house it. Don't bring it
Oh,
into the home.
no, some things cornbread speaks to me. There's
Mm,
not much I can do about that.
yeah.
But yeah, so we got a good show for everybody today on a fun topic, strength. Everyone's obsessed with getting strong, and so we'll dive into that a little bit. But before we do, just the classic housekeeping. Appreciate everybody out there who supports the show. You want to continue help to do that. Go to very.random.com. Check out the cycles that we offer. There's on-ramp programs for getting into barbell, bodyweight, dumbbell. There's a whole bunch of get your first cycles, which upload to the btwb app. Get your first pull-up, strict ring, muscle up, handstand, push-up, all kinds of stuff. There's some just barbell capacity programs. There's engine work, so check it all out. If you're a gym owner, go to btwb.com because BTWB has an all-in-one, so you can do workout tracking, gym management, and billing all together. Same software, same platform, make your life easy. So check that out if you're a gym owner. Okay, so today's topic is from an individual. His initials are MS, and he says, I've been doing CrossFit for 12 years, and he's 40. At 40 years old, my strength gains have slowed to a crawl, leaving me in the scaled or intermediate tier for most workouts if there was three tiers. If there was a prescribed, intermediate, and a scaled, so I'm always between scaled and the intermediate. My question isn't about skills acquisition, but about moving the needle on my pure strength numbers to finally hit prescribed. What's the most effective path forward? Finding ways to progressively overload within Metcons, prioritizing a separate strength-focused training, or biting the bullet and attempting the Rx weights even if it means drastically longer workout times or a compromised metabolic stimulus. Now, there's a second part about how we should eat to make this happen, but that's the primary question right there. And if we happen to get into like a diet that supports it, cool, but I think that's the bulk of the question.
Yeah, there's a few things that I find interesting about this question. Number one is 12 years in the game. It's a long time to be doing anything.
Heck
And
yeah, it is.
so the first question I'd want to follow up with, if this person were having a conversation with me in real life or I was their coach, would be okay, what do these 12 years look like? Has this been 12 years of super consistent, 3 to 5 times a week, doing the things you're supposed to be doing, no real significant time off in that 12-year period? Is that what this 12 years looks like? Or is this 12 years like, hey, I started 12 years ago and I had a really great run for 18 months and then some family stuff happened or some life things interfered and I kind of fell off for a couple years and then I jumped back in.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what that 12 years has looked like. Maybe it's something in the middle, I don't know. But first things first, that number to me doesn't mean much without a lot of context that kind of fills in the blanks. So I'm kind of curious, like, what does this 12 years look like? And then, kind of to dig a little deeper on that, what is the starting point that this individual came into the program with versus where are they now?
Mm.
Because I think it could be easy to write it off and say, all right, you've been working on this for 12 years and you say you want to get to this Rx level and you're not there. Man, maybe there is something fundamentally wrong with with what's happening because it doesn't appear like that progress is there. But without knowing what that starting point was, it's really hard to assess that. So that would be my other thing is, have we seen continued progress over this 12 years? Has it been relatively stagnant? Like, what are we talking about? Um, then I think we can really get to the meat of the issue, which is, okay, not interested in skill acquisition. So am I led to believe in that like this person is pretty competent when it comes to gymnastics? I mean, that seems to be what they're saying here. And it leaves kind of only this Rx'd weight. Then I would want to dig in and start asking, okay, what are the lifts that you feel you're closer to that Rx'd and what are the
Mm-hmm.
lifts that you're not? And start tackling it that way. Because I think within every individual, there's going to be a range there. There's going to be some, movements where, hey, I'm comfortable throwing caution to the wind during one of these Metcons that might be a little bit heavier. And then there's going to be times where you're like, absolutely not. I need to take that intermediate road. And it's clearly representative of like a deficit in my overall strength. Using myself as an example, like when a heavy deadlift comes up in like workouts that you call heavy with a high heart rate, often I am going to be scaling that down a little because I'm just not a great puller. I've
Mm.
never been a real great deadlifter. When it comes to doing a lot of reps at a high weight or a high percentage of my 1 rep max in a heavy breathing type of situation, man, it's a recipe for disaster for old Bosman. So in a workout like that, I'm typically going to be a little bit more conservative, but I'm a great squatter by contrast. And
Mm.
so if there's a workout that has a heavy, high heart rate approach, but it's a squatting movement, I'm usually going to be okay. And I know that about myself. And so I'll approach those differently, even though, I'm not sure that one is more indicative of my overall level if you have to categorize it between RX or intermediate. So lots to dig in here that
Yeah,
we
for
don't
sure.
know that would make answering this a little bit easier. But anyway,
Yes, no, agreed. There'd be some great context and backstory that would help give a maybe a more individualized answer. Knowing the current lift numbers would be really nice, right? Like,
mhm,
what is the current squat, dead, press, jerk, or whatever? Because then if you're comparing yourself to these quote unquote prescribed lows that you'd like to get close to, is that the 95-pound thruster in Fran, or is that a 155 hang power clean in DT, or is
right,
that, the 275 deadlift in, is that McGee 275 on the
I
deadlift in
believe it.
McGee? Yeah, is
Yeah,
that the 275 for 30-minute AMRAP? So there's a whole bunch of different stuff there. What is it? The 75 pounds in Randy, like et cetera, et cetera. What are we talking about? So that would be good as well. And then just, I mean, some factors are just some factors, right? I mean, first of all, if we're talking about most people, most circumstances, most of the time, which is how we kind of try to frame a lot of these things, you know regardless of how long you've been at something, strength gains are difficult, as you reach 40. Yes. Okay, like that's just, yeah, impossible? No, absolutely not. But potentially more challenging, and you've got to pay attention to some more things than maybe you used to, and you don't have as much wiggle room and you can't be as sloppy before with nutrition, sleep, recovery, warmth, like whatever. Yeah, probably so. Probably so. I would also love to know just the height and weight of the individual. Are we talking somebody who's 5'6" and 150 pounds, or are you 6 foot tall, 200 pounds, and struggling to get to prescribed weights? Like that'd be an interesting thing to just know as well, and they're all part of that. But if we take all those things aside, okay, I'm going to say for whatever it is, it's average height, average weight. That ain't the issue. um, you've been said you've been training for 12 years. Let's say that that's generally consistent. You're not perfect, but you've been doing far more training than not training.
mhm,
Diet's okay, could be better. Like you're the typical person doing it, and you're unhappy with where you're at. And let's actually say for a second that I would say that we make some basic assumptions that person has good level of self-awareness, isn't missing some big hole in their fitness, like you said, that gymnastic strength or engine or conditioning, like, hey, I did a real honest assessment and I actually seem to be that person, that I'm not too bad in these other areas, but when I compare my strength numbers, this is a significantly, it's just off kilter compared to everything else. I do really feel like this is what's holding me back. What are some ways that I could maybe shore up this weakness? Because I do feel this would make me a better, more well-rounded athlete. Like that's going to be kind of how I'm going to my charitable view is how I'm going to approach this, if that makes any sense.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
And I got a couple, man, I had a couple things, and I started like scratching stuff down. So my little hairbrain didn't go in 28 different directions, and I just kept scratching stuff down. So I'm going to try not to get like too
Yeah.
crazy about this, because he offers a couple routes that I think you could make a case that many of them work. It's just
Yes.
which one works for you. So the things that were thrown out there is, okay, what's the most effective path forward? Should I find a way to progressively overload within Metcons? We'll get to that in a second. Um, Prioritize a separate strength focused training. Well, strength focused trainings, if they're effective, they will make you stronger. That could work. Bite the bullet and attempt the prescribed weights, even if it means drastically longer times, which might result in a compromised metabolic stimulus. I think in my mind, you've got a couple ways to do this. And I almost feel like we could chat for a second on the whole progressive overload thing, because I just feel like that is buzzword's not the fair thing to say, but that is a term or an umbrella that I hear get thrown out a lot as I think it's in people's mind as like progressive overload is what you use to get strong. And that's what we do, and it's this linear progression where each week I know I'm going to bump up 1 kilo or 5 pounds, and that leads to strength, and these other things don't. I'm just hoping that I get strong. And so I don't know what direction you want to go in it, but we could chat progressive overload for a bit, or we could just chat things in general.
Well, maybe I'll leave you to give your thoughts on the progressive overload because it sounds like you got some.
Yeah.
But I'll also say, similar to you when I started reading this question before we got on to record, when going down that list, I was like, yes to all of those. Basically, it's like if you feel that you need to be getting a little bit stronger, any of those that were presented in that question would be relatively viable for getting a
Mm-hmm.
little bit stronger. When I think about all three of those things kind of being stated, it sounds to me, and this is total armchair quarterbacking here. I don't know what's going through this individual's mind, but seeing all of those kind of looped to or lumped together in this question, it leads me to think that this person is a little bit rigid in their approach to what they're doing when they're training and what outcome they think they need to be getting in each daily session. And I think the last one is kind of really evidence of that. It's like it almost feels like there needs to be a permissioning of like, yeah, sometimes it's okay to struggle with the workout, even if it means it's
Mm-hmm.
slow and even if it means you don't get a lot of reps. Them's the breaks. I mean, that's true for all of us at a certain time. And just because one workout out of 20 didn't hit the quote unquote intended stimulus, it doesn't mean that there's any sort of deleterious effects from that. In fact, it's probably just the opposite. It's that thing that you're exposed to that you know you're going to struggle with that can really be helpful, even though it doesn't feel great in the moment. So to me, I think there might be a bit of a mindset adjustment that's necessary with this individual, where it's like, hey, look, it's great that CrossFit has developed enough at this point where there are some basic categories that can help people navigate stepping through from, one experience level to another. But at the end of the day, they're not rigid. And oftentimes the lines are going to get blurred day to day, week to week. And so I don't think you do yourself any favors by kind of taking the structure that's meant to kind of help you, step by step advance
Mm-hmm.
and feeling like you have to adhere to it because there's some sort of rule. Um, you know what I mean? At a certain point, it stops serving you. And to me, that combination of solutions, it sounds like this person knows what could be done to improve their circumstance, but they're just not quite allowed to, for lack of a better term, in their own mind to take some of these steps, which seems unfortunate.
Yeah, and I think some of the stuff that I'm have on my mind loops into what you're saying, and you might have some interesting input in it as well. Again, being authorized to make the best decision for yourself, or hopefully everyone feels empowered to do that. The first two things that he mentions as to what might be the most effective path forward, number one says, finding way to progressively overload within Metcons, and then prioritizing a separate strength-focused training. If I take those two for a second, the separate strength-focused training will most likely be a progressive overload sort of linear approach that as a standalone item, easy to understand. The finding ways to progressively
Mhm.
overload within Metcons, I think it's vague. I think it's tough to identify what that means, but I also think you might be already doing it and not even realizing that you're doing it. And that's what I'm going to try to chat about here, unless I start to sound like an idiot, then you can reel me in. Because I think, progressive overload, I've got it in my head and I looked up to get the classical definition of it. So progressive overload in strength training is a strategy where you gradually increase the difficulty and or intensity of your workouts to stimulate muscle growth and gains. It involves increasing weights, reps, sets, or decreasing rest times over time, which progressively challenges your body and forces it to adapt. So it's not just you add 5 pounds each week. You could be doing more weight, or you could be doing more reps in a set period of time. You could be doing increase the overall volume of your work, or you could decrease rest times. You could do work faster. Like all of these variants, all these different things should be part of a well-structured strength and conditioning, CrossFit style, classic CrossFit like program. They all should be in there. But I think those elements are very easy for the casual participant or observer to see in its, well, I'm deadlifting 70% this week for this many reps, and then 2 weeks from now it's 70% plus 2 kilos. I can see that it went, like, it's easier to lay out. Whereas if you're following CrossFit programming, it may not be quite as obvious. And so
Sure.
here's what I would say. You know, it also listed the 4 common ways that you're going to, through progressive overload, try to improve your just generally strength or fitness. Is number one, increasing the weight load. Number two, increasing duration of training. Number three, increasing intensity. And number four, increasing reps. And so I'm going to just touch on each one of those four and then say what it might mean in CrossFit terms. And maybe somebody might be like, oh, I actually am doing that, and I didn't realize that I was. And so if number one is increasing the weight, which it says, uh, you know, you're gradually placing additional stress on the muscles, blah, blah, blah. For example, week one, you bench press 100 pounds. On week four, you bench press 105. On week eight, you bench press 110. That makes sense to people. I'm increasing the weight each time I circled back to the bench press in this example. But in CrossFit terms, increasing weight, this one's probably an easy one. On the classic heavy day, you're attempting 5 more pounds on the 5x5 deadlift, the 7x1 back squat that came up 3 months ago. It comes up again. You try to slide some more weight on the bar. Like, that's increasing weight. Or you could also increase weight in a CrossFit terms on not just like a classic heavy day like that, but also if you are trying to move from a scaled workout to a prescribed workout. If, for example, we take Fran, which everybody knows, maybe you traditionally do Fran with a 75-pound barbell thruster because you can't do the 90-pound, 95-pound thruster. Fran came up 6 months ago, and when it comes up again, you put 80 pounds on the bar this time. You don't jump to 95 pounds, but you bump it up 5 pounds and you do it. Now, maybe it takes longer, but you'd be resting between those lifting sets either. So you can increase this loading when a repeat workout comes up. If your goal is, like this individual has stressed, a focus on moving heavier loads to improve their overall strength, that might be a way. When what they're saying in this first one is like finding a way to progressively overload within Metcons. If you are knowing, like through btwb, what you did last time, the load that you used, the time that it took, you place in the notes, how it felt, did you have more in the tank, those notes and that data is ideally going to be used the next time this rolls around, if you're progressing as an athlete, to make a better decision or to appropriately challenge yourself as an athlete. And so that's the first one I would say is easily at your disposal. I don't know if you've got anything to jump in on that one.
Yeah, I agree. I think, again, reading between the lines here, not knowing for sure, that what the individual is talking about when they talk about progressive overload in the workout is exactly that. Can I make it a little bit heavier in a conditioning style workout to improve my strength? And I think the short answer is sure you can. I kind of lump it into the same category as, should I just do the RX weight from time to time and accept that it's going to be a little slower and maybe less reps completed? to me, they're kind of one and the same thing. And I think the answer is yes, absolutely. You should be doing that. And, it shouldn't, the caveat is that it can't be every day you're attempting this weight that you know is a little bit beyond you, and you end up, never getting to that point that you really taste some intensity because
Hmm.
every single session you're overreaching. Well, that's a different scenario.
Right.
But if it's,
Absolutely.
once a week, once every, however many workouts, you're like, you know what, today's the day, I'm going to go 225 on the deadlift instead of 185, and you accept that it's going to be what it is, then great. I think there's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, I think it can be really not only energizing to your training in some regard, but yeah, it can help progress that needle. Um, so I don't know if I might have wandered off a little bit from
No,
the point of progressive overload,
no.
but I do
I,
think they're kind of one and the same.
yeah, I agree. And like I said, I'm trying to apply this term because everyone
Yeah,
loves.
sure.
There's things people love. They love to hear the term. They love to hear the term zone two. They
Yeah.
love to hear the term progressive overload. They love to hear the term linear. There's certain things they just love and they latch
Yeah.
onto. And I'm trying to let people know, like, if
Well, it's
as your
neat. I
and
get it. It's neat.
as your strength and conditioning IQ improves, like you can do this, and you may actually
Sure.
already be doing it, and it just might not look as simple as, well, week 4 right now, 4 weeks later is 5 pounds more. So check this out.
Yep.
So yes, I also agree with what you said, which was something I had down in my Rolodex in my mind of I don't see anything wrong with, for lack of a better way to say it, suffering through the prescribed load
Yeah.
every now and then, as long as you safely can. Now, if your back looks like a
Of course.
scoop of
Sure.
mashed potatoes,
Yeah.
we're not going for that. But like, it's just, I'm going to be slower than what I have as the goal time in my head. Cool. Like, you're going to be good.
Yeah.
And if you're doing some nice varied training, right, then ideally sprinkled over the course of 5 or 6 workouts a week. If every day is a heavy slog and then you're suffering through the heavy slog every day, then yeah, you might be missing something. But if over the course of 5 or 6 workouts, a couple of them are heavy, a couple of them are light, and there's a moderate, well, there's a good chance you can send it on the light.
Yep.
The moderate is probably, and hey, on these two,
Exactly.
this is a challenge day. Awesome. Like, I don't see
Yeah.
anything wrong with that at all, quite frankly, especially if it's actually, that's where you need to be. You can
Yeah.
have a smoke session on the other days and struggle on those days. I think you'll be okay.
Yeah. And, it's kind of interesting if you think about just the old school approach to CrossFit. I think about this quite a bit when people talk about programming and they talk about some of these terms like intended stimulus. And, these are discussions that really only came about later. Back when some of these original CrossFit workouts were put to paper, there was no consideration that, like, well, Fran should be a 3 to 5 minute effort. It was like, no, it became that because over time, there were enough people that did Fran, and it seemed like that was kind of the sweet spot for that rep scheme at that load, at that general fitness level. It usually netted about a 3 to 5 minute effort.
Mm-hmm.
But when it was first starting, it was not intended to be like, well, this should be a sub 5 minute effort for most people. It's like, no,
Didn't
this
take
is
me
the
sub 5, I'll
workout.
tell you that.
Right. And you're going to do it. And if you are somebody that needs work on their engine, you're going to feel it in that capacity most, because by extension of those two movements being put together, that's just what happens. If you're got enough strength to lift the house, but you don't have the lungs to support it, you're going to crash and burn in that regard. Conversely, if you got all the lung power in the world, but you can't get that 95-pound barbell over your head, you're going to feel it that way. And there's going to be this kind of self-leveling effect that was present in many of these workouts and still is, but now there's been enough exposure that people think it has to exist within this certain band. And it makes sense when you start thinking about, okay, I'm going to put together a program and I want to make sure I've got all my bases covered,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to make sure that I'm exposing my athletes to the right time domains and the right exercise selections and things like that. It makes sense as an organizing principle, but it was never meant to be this rigid, Fran equals X. And you can do that exercise for any other workout. It's like, yeah, okay, so the programmer intended this to be a 15-minute effort and it took you 18 minutes. Who cares? You
You're
still
fine.
had an awesome exposure there. And like I said, there's a self-leveling factor in many of these workouts that, it's going to turn out okay. So all the more reason I just keep coming back to this, and I think I've kind of beaten it over the head yet, but like, give yourself permission to stretch just a little bit. And hopefully it also kind of indicates something that is on my mind with this too, which is that Yes, it's useful when people are designing programs. They're generally going to have a range of weights that fall into either the quote RX category or the intermediate category. But there is also no fine line there that says, well, this weight is RX'd all the time for this movement, and this weight is intermediate or scaled. No, that's not the way it works either. There's a huge range within that, and it's often not that codified. If it is, it's for the benefit of the person putting the programming together to keep themselves organized more so than it is like a hard and fast rule that will dictate progress,
And
if
I
that
would
makes sense.
and I would just say that sometimes, okay, like the term prescribed, right? I mean,
Hmm.
you could just take that out and just say recommendation,
Yes. Yeah.
okay, so maybe the prescribed load, what is that? Uh, I actually have this in my mind because I've been doing some programming. This came up, and this is going to be sometime in the future for the wonderful people at Linchpin.
A little
That
sneak peek.
that deadlift workout for the 2008 games, the 5 rounds of the 5 deads of
Oh, yeah.
275 and 10 burpees, or maybe
Yep.
it's the other way around, but that one, it's like, okay, again, like you're saying, if you're trying to cover all your bases and all that, like, and we're thinking about what that workout in its most beautiful essence is a nuclear bomb to your central nervous system and all of your athletic ability. You need strength. Your lungs are going to be on fire. You're going to feel like you ran an 800-meter. Like it's beautiful. And so, okay, if you can do the 5 rounds of the 5 deads of 275, and you finish the workout 31 minutes later, like, yes, got in a great lifting session because you probably took a lot of time between those lifts.
Sure.
You probably increased your,
Hmm.
but that's not what we're going for that day. So the recommendation could be, hey, we got a heavy lift happening on this day. Classic lift heavy. On this one, like you said, I want you to 275 is what we're throwing out there. That's what it was in 2008. That's the inspiration for this. It fit into everything else. But if you're looking at this and you're going, well, my 1 rep max is 315. Yeah, I could do 275, but that's a big ass. Well, that sounds
Hmm.
dumb. You probably shouldn't do that if your 1 rep max is 315. The intended stimulus that day is, I want you to choose a set of 5 that is challenging, and you're pushing the pace. You're not sandbagging the burpees to be a hero in the barbell. Like, you're giving both the devils their due, and you think that this is going to go really well until about round 4. Like, choose a load that you're like profoundly confident of touch to go in round 1 and 2 and 3, and like, 4 and 5 are going to be, whoo, yeah, it's going to be nasty. Whatever load that is for you, it's probably going to be heavy relative to your deadlift number, and you're going to get what you should out that day. The prescribed number might get in your head and it makes you feel like whatever it is, but like, prescribed has value because you have to have some sort of a baseline and template to organize where things are and where they fall. But then there's the individual ability of the athlete, where they are in their fitness journey, and you can benefit from that workout regardless of where you are and regardless of what your deadlift number is, if you, again, understand what are we doing that day. Yes, I know what the prescribed load was, but what am I trying to get out of this workout? And so that was a bit of a ramble as well.
Yeah. No, you kind of jog my memory about something there that I think is important when you're approaching a workout that you know is a bit of a reach, is that you don't have to do it as prescribed all the way across the board. And so, what I mean by that, using your example, you said it really well there. Hey, okay, if your deadlift is 315 and the workout calls for a 275 for reps, that's going to be a tall order.
Mm.
But how many reps? Maybe there's a
Yeah.
way to scale it from 5 reps around to 3 reps around. So
Yes.
you get that
Yes.
exposure, but you know that the total volume isn't going to crush you. There's a
Beautiful.
great example. Or maybe you knock a round off on the end. Like you said, I'm confident
Beautiful.
for 4 rounds. Let's do that. That's my version of this workout today. And I get that benefit of the exposure to the heavier weight, but I still don't have to, be either intimidated or just stopped by the full volume. So
Yes.
there's plenty of ways to skin that cat that don't always just come back to, well, the weight has to be reduced.
And they
It's like,
all
okay,
get
well,
you to the finish line.
exactly. Yeah.
Like you were saying, when you read this question initially, and you were kind of like, well, kind of yes to all,
Yep.
really, to some
Yep.
degree. And so, okay, to get back on track here, to keep going down my little train of thought. So there were 4
Mhm.
things of like classic things associated with progressive overload. We talked number 1. Number 2 is, this may or may not apply. Most CrossFitters probably wouldn't want to do this, but this is what it says under progressive overload. Number two is increasing the length of a workout, which is what most CrossFitters don't want to do. And this says helps a person build endurance, can move, improve cardiovascular fitness. And they're talking about like steady state. So you ran for 30 minutes, then you try to go for 45, then you try to go for
Mhm.
60. Like that, that makes sense. And but that also applies to the CrossFit world as well, which you're like, why would I want to do that? I don't want to be slower. It's like, well, in the CrossFit world, like maybe the workout of the day, you can also progressively overload things that aren't your barbell. Like you're working up towards your 5K, but you don't have that capacity yet. So you did the scaled quote unquote workout, which was for 20 minutes, you're going to run, jog, walk, or any combination of that. Walk when you have, just go out for 10 minutes, come back for 10 minutes, and note your distance. And then the next time it comes up, you're still not ready for the 5K, but instead of making it a 20-minute window, you do it for 25 minutes. And then, you're gently increasing that duration. So again, there are ways that you probably, well, that makes total sense. I would get that. It's like, well, you're applying these concepts maybe without even realizing it to
Mhm.
your workouts on a regular basis. And that's why you're improving. So I would take that as well. You could also maybe, let's see, it could be a quote unquote longer workout, which maybe, you typically don't want to do in CrossFit, but it actually could be progress because maybe as you're building up all these things, we come back to the good old Fran thing. You've done Fran and you've built up from, whatever, 65 to 75 pounds, and finally you got 95 pounds on the barbell, but you're not ready for 21:15:9. So your Fran was 15:12:9. I guarantee you weren't shortchanged doing that and moving that quickly. And now another 6 months has gone by. You've done all these other workouts. Fran has come up, and you're like, you know what? I'm going to stick with the 95 pounds, but I'm not going to do 15:12:9. I'm going to do a longer workout. I'm going to go for 21:15:9. I know this is probably going to be my slowest Fran ever, but I'm going to do it. That's cool too. That's progress too. That's more time moving that barbell around. All of these things are different ways to get to the actual end zone that you're trying to get. So I would just encourage people to broaden their horizon. There is a time where taking longer on a workout, like it's nice for you. It's going to help get you to the finish line.
Sure. Yeah. And, when you are kind of taking that leap, it's easy to say when we're sitting here not in the middle of a workout, but it can be missed when the music's cranking, you're in your class with all your people around you, it gets competitive, etc. And that is the fact that you have to adjust your expectation anytime you take a bump up in skill, reps, weight,
100%.
etc. And so it seems obvious, but you have to give yourself that latitude where you're like, hey, all right, I did bump up the weight. No, it's not going to be an on par with my last PR type of attempt. Totally normal and totally to be expected.
It's a new
Um,
workout.
yeah, I'll kind of say that there's also another way that you could approach things progressively, to your point, without having to increase that load. And that is to just choose more challenging strategy. And this is something we've talked about a lot over the years. And I
I like
still
where you're
think
going
it's
with this.
it's really easy for people to overlook. But if we use the example of Fran that we've been kind of singing on, we got 21:15:9, not ready for a 95-pound barbell yet, no problem. So we're going to choose 65. Okay, well, what's a way you can challenge yourself with that? It's got to be unbroken or bust. Yeah, but Boz, if I go unbroken, it means I have to
Mm.
rest a little bit longer and it's going to, slow down my overall time. Isn't that bad? And I'd say, well, in this context, if you're looking to improve that barbell capacity and you know that's the effect that you are trying to maximize within this training, so what? So what if the overall attempt is a little bit slower, but you really challenged and stretched yourself in that regard? That's a win. So play around with different workouts that way without bumping the weight up. Maybe it's like, okay, I was planning to do this in sets of 5. No, today it's sets of 8 or 10 or unbroken. Take that for a ride. And then you also have a pretty nice guidepost there as to when it is appropriate to challenge yourself with the weight the next time that similar workout comes up. Because it's like, man, I did do this unbroken last time at that previous weight. If that's the case, you probably can take a bump up in weight and take smaller sets and be okay, even if that time frame is extended a little bit. You've proven to yourself, you're like, yeah, I can do this unbroken. it's probably going to be fine if I bump up a little bit. So look for other opportunities to challenge yourself within the weights that you are using. And don't always hang your hat on this, like, well, I've strategized myself out of the
Mm.
thing that I actually stated I wanted to improve. That happens a lot. And it's a little unfortunate. So watch out for that.
All right. Number three on the four common things that are associated with progressive overload is this will speak to CrossFitters increasing intensity. They broke this down into two categories, like a conditioning one and then a weight training one. So I'll
Sure.
touch both and see what sparks in your mind. So let's see. Increasing the intensity or tempo of an exercise session can improve fitness. I would agree with that. A person can do this by exercising at a faster pace or by taking shorter rests between sets. If an individual is doing cardiovascular training, they can increase the intensity by adding intervals. So what they're saying is, for example, if you're doing 30 seconds of like running followed by 60 seconds of jogging, and you used to be able to do 8 intervals of that, you've built it up. Now you can do 10 intervals. So that's what they're saying. In CrossFit terms, I would say you can do the same workout faster, right? Same load on the bar, you did it faster, you've increased the intensity. If you're doing something like the other day, I did 10 250-meter sprints on the rower. And so you could hold a quicker average pace across all of those. If you ran a 6x400-meter run, you hold a quicker pace. If you kept your rest periods the same, that would be one way that you could increase the intensity. Or you could hold the exact same pace, but you decrease the rest between the intervals. That is another way to do that as well. Like we said, we played with the Fran thing, the weight, the loading on Fran, things like that. Classic heavy day, you're just lifting more load. So there are again ways that this term that people like to throw around, progressive overload, you can and you probably are doing it in the darn CrossFit workouts that you do every day. So that's the cardio one. Then they touch a barbell one. Any thoughts on that before I go to the barbell one? Pretty
No,
straightforward.
yeah.
So then it says for people who are less focused on cardio exercise, another option, this is interesting, I thought was cool. Another option is to use a lighter weight but lift them at a quicker pace. Yes, yeah. Let's see. So it talks about, that's very obvious. And it says, in CrossFit terms, I said, maybe you grind through a prescribed Fran at 95 pounds. You can do that. The pull-up's okay, but the load is a beast. Takes you 10 minutes. And the next time, instead of grinding through at 95 pounds, you knock it down to 80 and you do it in 5 minutes. And like you said, you got to do it unbroken. You're going to just burn it down today. That might be really hard for somebody who's like, well, I don't want to go down in weight. My whole point is to get stronger. Again, like we said in this podcast, like variance is a really beautiful thing. And some of the ways it works might be a bit mysterious, but I'm here to tell you that moving sub-maximal loads quickly makes people very, very strong. And so, yes, some days you want to grind through the heavier loading. Take the time that you need because it's really heavy. You can't just get back to it for some more reps. Great. You want to have your classic heavy days where you're resting 3 to 4 minutes between sets. And then those days that have light weight, even if your goal is top end strength, I think you're doing yourself a profound disservice if you don't realize the incredible benefit, even to your top end strength, of moving lightweight fast. And so, again, just another key aspect that we do all the time. And it's probably one of the mysterious ways as to why people seem to get so darn strong, generally speaking, moving moderate loads really quick during CrossFit.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I agree.
Yeah.
uh, I'll say too. So if we kind of advance past to the last kind of strategy that they outlined, which was basically, do I add a strength program into what I'm doing, or do I try to see more strength training in my existing program? I think that can be a totally reasonable way to go. And this person's identified that they're in their 40s. They've been at this a while. And I think there's a pretty good recommendation that kind of floats out there that when you have people that have been around a while and or they're a little bit older, the frequency of exposure to something becomes more important than the volume of that exposure. And said another way, this is really obvious, but if you're taking somebody and you're trying to get them good at something, seeing that thing 3 or 5 times a week, even if that effort isn't a totally max effort, that's going to drive progress mostly, a little bit more so than seeing that thing once a month and totally burning it down. So if you want to get really good at pull-ups, generally speaking, it's going to be better to do some pull-ups every other day rather than I pick last Friday of the month and I do as many as I can and I don't do pull-ups again until that last Friday of the month.
Mm-hmm.
The same is true with strength training, particularly for athletes that have been around a while and or athletes that are a little bit older. See that barbell a little bit more regularly, but don't worry so much about the volume that you do see it when you see it. So just get those exposures into some heavier weights. And frankly, what we've been talking about will help you do that. If you choose from time to time to go for that heavier weight in that RX environment, even though you know it's going to be a little bit slower or a little bit more challenging, that's a great example of that exposure on a little bit more of a regular basis. It doesn't have to look like, I do a little bit of lifting every single day before whatever else I've got on the menu. You can dabble with that too if you like, but it doesn't have to be that linear and it doesn't have to be that kind of codified.
And the final of the 4 points is easy, and I'll just mention for a second. It's simple, which is just increasing the repetitions. So you're
Yep.
getting more reps with the same load, and that can make sense on a heavy day. If what you used to be able to lift for 5, you can now lift for 7, or certain number of reps in a minute, you're getting more than that. AMRAP numbers are going up, but it could also be something like choosing to hold on to the barbell longer. If Fran, if that first set of 21 is 3 sets of 7, does it have to be 3 sets of 7, or is that just a comfortable 3 sets of 7 for you? Maybe it can be a 14 and a 7, and you're going to hate your life. And so there are ways to get outside your comfort zone. If Grace is always quick singles, hold on to the barbell, make Grace 6 sets of 5 touch and goes or something like that. Like holding onto the bar for more time and attention can help as well. And the other thing, you mentioned, and I think it's a kind of a yes to both. Like frequent touches, yes, but you could make a heck of a play for the other side of the spectrum, which is less frequent touches, not once a month, but with a dosing of intensity, right? Because what I don't know for this person is your strength numbers maybe aren't going where you want them to go. What do those heavy days look like? Are you really actually giving them the respect that they deserve and getting yourself, yes, safely, but like appropriately challenge yourself that when you finish doing a 5x5 back squat, like you have no human desire to do anything else because you are so torched because relative to your capacity, you gave everything that you had. Like, one of those loadings on the bar that yes, you can do it, but as you're approaching the barbell, you're nervous for that set of 5 because you know that you're going to war. If you're lifting like that and really taking ample rest to hit it hard and not making progress, then I would be shocked. But I would also just address, like, are you truly bringing intensity and lifting with like a ferocious purpose and
Mhm.
attacking those lifting days, sleeping, eating, resting, and all that? And if it's no, I get in my lifts, but they're not my favorite days, so I don't really I'm sure they could do better. Well, then I bet you do have some gains on the table that you're not reaping the benefits of.
Yeah, or I mean, I think that just highlights the downside to always pairing your strength training with something else in the same day. There's nothing wrong with doing that. I think it can be really economical from a time standpoint to do that in a session. That's fine. But if the only exposure you get to strength training is coupled with something else that you know you've got on the back burner, it's so easy to fall into the habit of, well, it was good enough for the day, knowing that I've got something else to do. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, how much did you actually move the needle then if you knew you had to save something for this auxiliary effort? And that's been pointed out time and time and time again that sometimes the best path forward is to simplify what you're doing in the day, no matter what it is, so that you can really put that effort into that thing and not have to hold back, not have to keep something in reserve for whatever else you've got planned.
And I guess just the final thing that I'll say is, and I know that I'm biased, so I admit that. But what I do think, if you apply these principles to the CrossFit training that you're doing, you take an honest assessment of yourself, you make sure you're attacking things with intensity, the factors outside the gym are in order, all of those good things. Um, I think one of the most beautiful things is the variance in CrossFit because I mean, not just if you do want to get stronger, there are so many things we do that I think make people so powerful and strong that you most likely won't find in this relatively mundane, dare I say, boring, like progressive overload, linear strength progression, let's say for your deadlift or back squat. I doubt there's going to be like a lot of track sprint days. Like
Mm.
you want to have a posterior chain that is capable of power. Like get out there and sprint. Like there's so many things that we do that are beneficial to you becoming fitter, faster, and stronger because of variance. That if you can find a way to take a step back, use your strength and conditioning IQ, take an honest assessment of where you are, and then make the best decision for you, I think most of the time that more variance is better than less. That'd be the kind of last thing that I say there. Most of the time.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Yeah, I don't have much more to wrap on there. I think this individual, in my opinion, boiling it all down, just needs to give themselves permission to blur the lines a little bit between what they consider to be RX and intermediate, what they consider to be the quote intended stimulus of the day. Break some of those rules and just see. They're not as codified as you think, and they're great to use as organizing ideas, but they're not written stone. So don't forget that.
Well, hopefully that helped. These are topics that I think people love: strength, linear progressions, progressive overload. I mean, how many buzzwords can we put out there? So, if you've got thoughts and topics on these, personal experience, anecdotal information, whatever it is, find this show on the btwb YouTube channel. Post your thoughts there, ideas for future shows, agree, disagree, all that good stuff. We want to hear. We read those comments. We appreciate everybody out there for helping make this show what it is. For Adrian Bosman, I'm Pat Sherwood, and we will see you next time.